I'm Doug Thompson. Welcome to this edition of Legislative Updates with John Barker of the Kansas House of Representatives for the 70th District. Most of us get our information concerning the actions of the Kansas legislature either from some form of media or after the fact, as the legislation either became law or died during the process. Representative John Barker has graciously agreed to take time from his schedule to update pending legislation as the bills are moving through committee to consideration by the House of Representatives. Right after this short break, let's talk with Representative John Barker concerning this week in the Kansas legislature. Welcome to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, and as always with my special guest, John Barker. Wouldn't have Legislative Updates if it wasn't for John Barker being here to be able to do it. John, and John, of course, is representative for the 70th District. And John, we're coming up on about 5 weeks out from the legislature going back into session. Is that about right?
That's right.
And I know you've been busy because I know you've been talking with lots of people who have interest in what's taking place, and this is a good format for us to get the word out to a lot of people at one time. So tell me what you've been working on since we did our last show.
Yeah, I think our last show was in July, the wrap-up session.
Right.
Of course, we've had interim committees during the summertime. You know, being a legislator is kind of a year-round job. You know, you don't work every day, but you have committee meetings, and I've had a number of committee meetings. You know, and we've also working with the school finance decision that came out from the Supreme Court, and we'll talk about that hopefully a little later. I've been, you know, my legislative post audit that I chair, we've had a number of meetings and ordered some audits that will be coming in December, so I'm busy with that. And then last week on the 27th, I'm on the Joint Committee on Pensions, Investments, and Benefits for the state, KPRS. And so we met on the 27th and got an update of where we're at on our KPRS system, our retirement system for the state. And it was illuminating.
I bet it was. And you know, of course, the KPRS is something that's of interest to many people across the state. So kind of fill us in on the KPRS program.
Well, KPRS presently, it's the state retirement system. We have about 150,000 people that are involved in KPRS as active members presently. We have about 96,000 that are retirees who receive benefits from KPRS. And then we have about 55,000 people that are what we call inactive, people who have worked for the state or been involved in the KPRS system and then maybe found another job, did not take their money out, so it's sitting there growing. So, you know, with total of that, that's probably about 300,000 people.
It's a lot of people
that are involved in KPRS. It is, and so Alan Conroy, who's the executive director of KPRS, gave us an overview. I believe I handed you the book earlier, the overview.
Yes.
And I'm going to have it put on my Facebook page so people can, it's like 23 pages. And I'm just going to touch on some of the high points that we're presently in. We have an unfunded actuarial, which is it's an amount of money that unless we add additional money, KPRS could run out of money in 30 or 40 years.
And when you say could run out of money, what's that mean?
Well, the state changed the system in 1993 and allowed for the 85-point retirement. It means if you have time of service and your age, when it reaches 85 points, you can automatically retire without any penalties. Prior to that, it was always set to work with Social Security, and you would retire at 62 or 65, just like Social Security. Well, when they changed it, the actuarial, the company that, or the KPRS advised the legislature, if you're going to do that, you were going to need to put more money into it. And they didn't. So it created an unfunded actuarial, and so we're trying to work with that because, you know, you could be someone that's 23 or 24, 25, started working for the state, suddenly at 57, 58, you've got your 85 points, you get your retirement. Well, that means in 7 years, you get everything that you put into KPRS plus 8% interest in 7 years. So suddenly you're 62 or 63, you've been on KPRS for 7 years. And that's what comes, and you may live to be another 20 years.
Sure.
And that's what causes the unfunded actuarial.
Okay.
So
But as we look at the capers right now, would I be correct with this? Some of this is structured towards, well, for instance, like the growth of the economy.
Correct.
And
right.
so there was a 7-year stretch under President Obama that there was just no growth in that area, or minimal.
Right.
And now, in a sense, the last election, there's significant growth under President Trump. The stock market, I just keep hearing, is just every day seems to be a new record.
It is, and that's true, because all of our funds, and we've got $19 billion sitting in the Capers Trust Fund. And I get calls from constituents that, well, don't take any more money out of Capers. Well, we can't take money out of Capers. State can't. It's against federal law. It's against the IRS regulations. So once that money goes in, it's a lockbox. It's probably the most secure lockbox. It is the most secure lockbox that we have. Can't touch the money. Now, the state may choose not to contribute what it should contribute because of budget restraints. But the investments over 25 years have made about 8.2, 8.4%, which is very
An
good.
Excellent
return. And and this past year, we have what we call a 5-year leveling. Means we level everything over 5 years. So some years you may have a really high, some years really low, so we kind of keep it stable. But the investments are just going, they're great, because the stock market's up about 27% this year. It hadn't been up 27% the last 7 years. The GDP is 3.1, 2 quarters in a row. And that has not happened in the last 7 years, that much growth. Unemployment is the lowest it's been in 20, 25 years.
I know it. I've been reading that.
Jobs are being created. Whether or not you like Trump or not, President Trump, he's been good for business. He's been good for the market. And whether or not you like large corporations, all investment funds are invested in the market. When the market goes up, those funds do well. This year, I think it hit about 12%. But of course, we have that leveling, which brings it down because we had a number of bad years. So, but Capers are doing good.
When we come back from break, I want to ask you about how the tax cut will affect this, and then let's go into some of the particulars with Capers. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with special guest John Barker. And we were looking at the Capers just before we went to break, the 2016 edition of it. And you'll be able to take a look at the same information that Mr. Barker and I are looking at by going to the contact information that's on the screen right now. And specifically, let's take a look at page 31 on evaluation results. And walk us through that, because that is now up on your screen. You're looking at the same thing we are. This is page 31 from the Capers report that you can go to John Barker's contact information on there, and you'll be able to take a look at it. But it's also, that page is on the screen right now, so we're going to take a look at it.
Okay. We have a number of different funds. One is state employees. And then we have school employees, which is a different fund. Then we have local, which is like municipalities and counties that may be involved in the Caper system. Then we have the Kansas Police and Fire Fund. And then we have the fund for judges.
And that's the magistrate and the district judges?
That's correct.
Okay. And of course the Supreme Court and appellate judges?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We include them all. But the funding ratio for the state is like 79%. That's went up over the years. Presently, and the schools are funded at 60.2%. Now, that looks bad, and it is bad. But when I first came in the legislature, I was on Pensions and Benefits Committee, and at that time it was like 54%. So we went up on that. So it's up to 60%. Of course, we'd like to get it up to the 80s. The local, which is the counties and the municipalities that are involved in Capers, is at 70.3%. The Kansas Police and Fire is at 73.4%, and the judges are at 93.9%. Well, the judges are a small segment of that entire, and judges normally don't retire until they're 70, 75. So that's the reason that reflects.
Sure,
it.
well, that makes
But
sense.
all those numbers have went up, but that does create the 9.061 unfunded actuarial, 9 billion. But you think that there's 19 billion in the fund presently sitting there. But just to stay static or even, we will have to put in $632 million next year to keep that unfunded actuarial the same. We have to put more into it. Of course, we went into some bonding a few years ago. A couple of years ago, we bonded $1 billion. We got a very good interest rate. In the last 2 years, that's made us an additional $73 million. And I think it was in '05 that the legislature bonded $500 million, which is $500 million. And it's brought in, after you service the debt, I think it was like $400 million. So, I mean, we're making some money on our investments, the general investments, plus the bond issues. So we do have a plan that in 2033, we should eliminate the unfunded actuarial. Now, I know that's long term, but it's like buying a house.
Right.
You have to take some time to get caught up.
So that they would be fully funded.
They would be fully funded in 2033.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I know that you encounter when you go out and you're out on the speaking to citizens who have concerns, that I will sometimes hear people say, "Well, don't take our money from Capers."
Right.
What?
Can't take your money from Capers. What goes into the lockbox, as I previously mentioned, but also, I mean, the contribution level. Even though the legislature says we can't fund it fully this year, we're going to take another $97 million, which we did a couple of years ago, and not fund it, or not pay into it. It does not go away.
So it's not taking money out.
No, it's not taking money. Your contributions are like $97 million, which was a couple of years ago. But that $97 million goes into a accounts receivable for Capers, and the state has to pay that 97 back at the assumed rate, which is 7.75 right now. So it's like a loan that the legislature eventually, they cannot not pay it. That's an obligation. It just means that they're going to have to make a loan, or they count it as an accounts receivable, and the state has to make that up between now and 2033.
So those people who are saying, well, you know, I'm 45 years of age, I'm going to be paying into this. When I get to that point of 65, there isn't going to be any money there. They don't have to worry about that.
The state there's no worry there. The state has the obligation to actually pay that. And whatever the assumed contribution rate is, should the state not fully fund it that year, that does not go away. That is just carried over by Capers as a accounts receivable that the state has to make up at some point in time.
Okay. And so this is actually getting stronger really every year as we're talking about it.
If the legislature keeps its contributions to that level, but it is growing every year. As I mentioned, $632 million next year. And last year, of course, they shorted I think it was 2 years ago, it was $97 million, and they added another $100 million. But that goes in a 20-year-long note that the state is obligated to pay.
Okay.
So Capers is secure. And you got $19 billion sitting in the trust fund. We presently pay out $1 billion in benefits in a year, a little over $1 billion, and we take in about $1 billion.
Because of the growth rates
Right.
going on right now. We're going to cut away, take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little about school financing.
Be good.
Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with special guest John Barker, representative from the 70th District. And we've been talking about, just finished up talking about Capers for the time being. And now let's jump over to school finance, because when the legislature adjourned, school finance was a hot topic, and it looks like it's going to be a hot topic as we start in again. You anticipate that?
I do. I mean, we put in an additional approximately $300 million in education this past year, because we did the largest tax increase in Kansas history, like $1.2 billion. I think a lot of people thought, well, the additional $300 million, that would satisfy the court. Court did not say that it was enough money. They kept the case open. I think we've been in litigation on school finance for 20, 25 years. And it's all about one word in the Constitution, that the legislature will provide a suitable education. and of course you get a word like suitable, you know how litigation goes. Right. Everybody's got what they think suitable is.
That's right.
The court has not told us exactly what they define, other than the Rose standards, which is a standard that came out of Kentucky. You know, we've got 1/3 of our students that are not achieving at the level they should be achieving.
Scholastically?
Scholastically. And we're talking about, you know, should we spend money on those 1/3 below the level, or should we spend money on all the kids? And I think all the students, and I think that's where we should spend it, but we need to concentrate some money in that area. With the additional $300 million, the Supreme Court gave us until April to work out another solution. And of course, 3 of those justices would have closed the schools immediately in their dissent opinions. They've said they're going to close schools in April. I always remind them of, look at the statute, 60-2106, paragraph D, which is remedies. You know, the legislature creates remedies for courts when they do, like we have sentencing guidelines. Right. We have the sentencing guidelines, the blocks. Sure. You know, we say, if you're convicted of this, these are what the judge's options are. This is what the sentence will be. They don't come up with their own sentences. Right. They follow the guidelines. They always follow the remedies that the legislature created. Well, under 60-2106, which was passed in 2005, says that if on school finance, one of the options is not, you cannot close schools, you cannot impede the funding of schools. But yet the Supreme Court has said that we're going to close schools. I would ask them to read the statute. And the legislature creates the laws. They enforce the laws. They may declare it unconstitutional, but they have not yet. So I'm not sure what we're going to do in that area. I know that there's a move at the legislature to have a constitutional amendment that would define what suitable is, or give that maybe to the Department of Education, the education specialist, to decide what is suitable and not the court. So I have no problem with the constitutional amendment, because the only thing I'm doing is say, citizens of the state of Kansas, vote on this. Tell us what you want. It's an easy decision, as you know, as a judge, when you don't have to make a decision. That's right. So I'm for passing a constitutional amendment and say, okay, folks, the citizens of the state of Kansas who pay the taxes, tell us what you want us to do. Yeah. Yeah, because it always comes down to the bottom line. We've talked many times as we've finished a show, or even when the show's going on, and you'll say, well, here's what the mandates are for this. And I say, where's the money come from? Yeah. And it always comes from the taxpayer. That's where it comes from. And that's a situation that we have going here. So it's very difficult for I would think it would be for the legislature to say, okay, is this enough money? And because you're trying to find a figure that the Supreme Court says, okay, we like this figure, there, we're there now. Right. As opposed to saying, here's how much money we think should be in there, whether or not legislature agrees. That's true. I think it's a legislative function. In fact, on my website, I'm going to have this graph that's out of the Department of Education that shows the funding that the state has contributed to education since 2005. If you'll notice, the only time it's been cut was in, I think, between 8 and 9, 2008, 2009, and then in 2010 it was cut. And every year since, and every year I've been in the legislature, we've increased funding. Who was the governor when this was, when it was cut? That was Parkinson. Democrat? Democrat. Okay. Governor Parkinson. But we've added more money. It may not be enough money. One of those things, you can never give them enough money. But also the other departments, like higher education, are complaining now because we've had to take money from higher education, the college and university, to give to K through 12. I just want the folks, just like a bond issue, we give it to the public to tell us if they want to give more money. If we do a constitutional amendment, they will tell us and let the people vote on it. I'm a big believer in the voting process, letting the majority rule. And so I know I talked to the Speaker yesterday, Speaker of the House, Ron Reichman, and he thinks that may be the course that we need to take. Of course, it'll all be determined after we start in January. We'll work through the process and have hearings and see where we're at. Yeah, you know, I'm looking back at the chart right now, and it's the same chart you're looking at on the screen of the spending per pupil. Mm-hmm. And if you take a look at that, I mean, it's just every year has gone
almost every year has gone up,
Right.
the spending per pupil.
Well, this year, with the additional money, we're going to spend $13,236,000, $12,236,000 on each student. And now we're including, it would have been higher, but now we're including the the kindergartners, which are full-time. Before they were counted as half, now they're counted as full-time, the kindergartners.
Wow. So the legislature goes back into session here in January the 8th, and this will be one of the hot topics, I'm sure. And when we come back from break, well, let's go into some of the other areas that's going on with the state.
Okay.
And we'll talk about some of those. The school finance is going to be one I'm sure we're going to track as we go. We're going to cut away, take a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Legislative Updates. I'm your host, Doug Thompson, with special guest John Barker from the 70th District, State Representative. And John, we've only got just a little bit of time to go. Like I mentioned right before we left for break, the legislature comes back into session in January 8th. And of course, school finance is going to be one of the topics. But boy, there's a lot of things going on nationwide with the sexual harassment, and there's all of a sudden this person's fired, that one's fired. We find out that there's a fund at the national level that is being tapped into for this, and you anticipate some of those same issues will come into the Kansas level?
Oh, I'm unaware of any fund that we would pay out like the federal government has. But the Kansas City Star has been doing a number of stories, and I think it's also been in the Topeka paper about the former chief of staff of the minority leader, Tom Burrows, said that she'd made a complaint to him that he didn't do anything. He indicated that he did take some action. She's now in D.C. They're talking about the frat house where a number of the Democrats lived, and that they were using interns to drive them around to different receptions while they were drinking. I don't know if any of that's true, but that's been the allegation.
Some of those things are going to come out.
Some of those things will come out, and I think the Kansas City Star is doing a pretty involved editorial every week or so.
Good. Well, we'll watch.
We've got the governor's race, and
going to be a lot going on.
A lot going on.
Hope you've enjoyed this session of Legislative Updates with John Barker. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Tune in next time for another legislative update. Thanks for watching.